Strange man shows up at my parents' house at 1 a.m. claiming to be my boyfriend from 20 years ago. I had to call the cops. This happened 3 nights ago, and I am going crazy trying to figure it out. I just moved into a new apartment 1 month ago, and I am still unpacking and settling in. I have been using my parents' address as my mailing address, who live a few towns over, 20 minutes away, all of my life. 3 nights ago my parents call me at 2 a.m. freaked out, and proceed to tell me this story. Apparently at 1 a.m. someone starts banging on their front door and repeatedly ringing their doorbell. My stepdad walks downstairs and opens the door, leaving the front glass door closed and locked. There was a man standing outside, who looked to be in his 30s, with a black hoodie on with the hood pulled up around his face. He didn't have any distinguishing facial features, facial hair or tattoos. The only thing my stepdad said was that he looked to be Hispanic. Neither my stepdad or my mother, who was watching the whole thing out a window, recognized the man. The man says, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I'm looking for my full name." My stepdad plays dumb and says, "Who?" The man proceeds to state my full name again and says that my boyfriend is worried because I didn't come home that night. He claims to be a friend of my boyfriend and tells my stepdad that they are both out looking for me, worried because I didn't show up at home. I don't have a boyfriend. I live by myself with my 3 dogs and haven't been in a relationship in the past 5 to 6 months. Here's the weird part. My stepdad asked the guy what boyfriend he was talking about, and the man tells him the name of the boyfriend I had when I was in 10th grade, nearly 20 years ago. My boyfriend in 10th grade has a very, very unique Italian name. I've never met anyone with a full name even close to his. He says my high school boyfriend's name a few more times to ensure my stepdad heard him and repeats that they are very worried about me. Is my stepdad sure I'm not inside? At this point my stepdad is weirded out and closes and locks the door in his face. The man does not leave. He lingers in front of my parents' house for the next 10 minutes, smoking cigarettes and talking on the phone. Finally, my parents calls the cops. About 5 minutes before the cops arrive, the man walks down to the dead end on their block and drives away in a silver car. Stepdad was unable to get the license plate. My parents file a police report and nothing else happens. After I hear this story I am going nuts over the weird details. How would someone know who I dated nearly 20 years ago, and what would the motive be of making up a story that included that weird detail about my past? I have not had contact with the 10th grade boyfriend in over a decade. Yesterday, I decide to message him on a Facebook to see if he has any insight. I tell him the whole story. He's just as confused as I am and claims to have no part in it. I am at a loss. I'm also really freaked out that some strange man is going through that much trouble at 1 a.m. to look for me. Any insights or ideas would be greatly appreciated. No, nothing else weird has happened since then. Edit. Wow, this really blew up. Thank you so much for all the kind words and precautions that I should take. I want to add something here that a few people commented, that might shine some light on this mystery. First off, I am not in any legal trouble and have no reason to think someone would be suing me. God, I guess it's always in the realm of possibility that I'm being sued by someone, but I really don't think that's it. Like I previously commented, I had an expired registration ticket that I did not show up to court for, but I believe I got a letter in the mail just asking me to pay a really large fee, so I don't think that's related. I did take a personal loan out. Took it out about 1.5 years ago. It wasn't for anything too crazy and I was really good with making payments on time until about 6 months ago when I had a medical issue. Currently, I am really behind on payments, but to my knowledge, I have not defaulted on the loan yet. What do you guys think? Related? I had absolutely no idea that this is a thing, or I would have included this detail to begin with. Let me know your thoughts. Edit 2. I have a list of a few things that I am going to look into tomorrow, based off my own thoughts and based off a ton of valuable feedback I got in here. Thank you. We'll post an update ASAP. Edit 3. I'm so sorry it's taken me so long to update. It's a super busy time at work. Unfortunately, there isn't much to report. I called the loan company. They claim to have nothing to do with it. All of my friends and family also noted that the 1 a.m. factor kind of rules that out anyway. Nothing else strange has happened at my parents'. I went there for the first time last night, and kept a close eye out for anything, didn't observe anything out of the norm. So this remains a mystery. I'll be sure to update if something else happens. Update 1. After this happened, me and my family and a couple of my close friends have been talking about this mystery in depth to try and put our heads together to figure it out. We all have our own theories, but ultimately no definitive answer as to what happened or who this creeper was. So we pretty much put it to rest and only continued to joke about it once in a while. Here's the update. My stepsister, my stepdad's daughter, and her fiancé were at a house party right after the holidays, around early January of this year. While they were there, they started talking to a girl that neither of them knew. After some time talking together, the girl started talking about her ex-boyfriend and how they were going through a really tough time together. They had just recently broke up and she felt really bad because he was a wreck over it. Somehow, it came up that this girl's ex-boyfriend was my 10th grade boyfriend, the one with the really unique Italian name. The whole situation wasn't that big of a coincidence, since I went to high school with my stepsister's fiancé, and we have a lot of mutual friends. So it makes sense that they were at a party that would include some people I went to high school with. As soon as my stepsister and her fiancé hear this, they both start freaking out, and without revealing too many details, they tell the girl about the whole mystery and how weird it was. As they are telling the story, the girl's face starts to go white, and she looks like she's about to cry. My stepsister and fiancé try to console her and ask her what's wrong. The wine/beer had been flowing at this point, so I'm sure everyone was a little tipsy. The girl starts to tell them that a few nights ago, she was sleeping, and someone started banging on her door at get this fucking 1 a.m. Just like what happened to me at my parents'. The girl jumps out of bed and says she was absolutely terrified by how loud and aggressive someone was banging on her door. She said she literally thought it was going to break in. The girl has a Ring camera, so looks on her phone. There on the camera is a guy, in a black hoodie, banging on her door. She obviously pretends like she isn't home, and keeps all of the lights off. He continues banging. As she is getting ready to dial 911, the guy stops and leaves. She said she was absolutely terrified. For whatever reason, she didn't end up calling the cops, but may have went to stay with a friend that night, or the night after. My stepsister and fiancé are shocked by the details and how similar it is to my story, especially because of the mutual ex-boyfriend we share, except this girl literally just broke things off with him. They asked the girl if she has any idea who the guy is and she said no, but that it definitely is not the actual ex-boyfriend. She said this guy was much taller and heavier than our shared mutual ex. How fucking weird. This mystery is still unsolved, and these new details honestly just make my head spin even more. No one else has showed up to my parents' door since the actual incident a year ago. OP added extra info in the comments. Hi all. So a few answers to some questions. 10th grade boyfriend was into drugs when I dated him back in high school. No idea if he continued to use throughout his life or not, but can confirm he is definitely an addict who may or may not be in recovery currently. 10th grade boyfriend has been to my parents' house multiple times. My parents still live in the same house I grew up in, and 10th grade boyfriend has been over many times while we dated in high school. I don't know where he currently lives, but he grew up about 10 minutes away from my parents' house. 10th grade boyfriend and I had a horrific breakup. I met my high school sweetheart while I was dating him and broke up with him in a pretty messed up way. He held a grudge over it all throughout high school and was extremely nasty to me to the point of bullying. At one point, I had to get a security guard to escort me to classes because him and his friends were bullying me so badly. The bullying was only severe for the rest of 10th grade, but he definitely hated me all throughout high school. At one point, he did end up apologizing to me, and explained that he was just heartbroken over me breaking up with him, but at that point, I was way past the point of forgiving him. After graduating high school, we ran into each other maybe once or twice while I was home from college, and he was totally cordial and nice with me, and we laughed the high school experiences off. I can definitely try reaching out to him on Facebook again and bringing back up this whole mystery with the added updates from his recent ex-girlfriend to see what his reaction is and gauge whether or not he's being truthful in it. I can also ask some mutual high school friends who know him about how he currently is, if he's into any shady shit or not. My stepsis only gave me a first name and description of recent ex-girlfriend from the party. But I can go on 10th grade boyfriend's Facebook and look for her under his friends, then reach out to her on Facebook Messenger to inquire about Ring footage and ask her more questions, also see if she ever reached out to cops. I agree this is probably the best thing to do if I want more answers, but I agree I need to be careful as I still don't know what is going on here. 10th grade boyfriend does not have a brother, just one younger sister that I remember back from high school. Relevant comments from Op. Comment 1. I just posted some answers in the comments about the nature of my breakup with high school boyfriend and how horrific it was and how he basically harassed me for the rest of the 10th grade. Your last theory, and what a lot of other people are commenting, is starting to make the most sense to me. It could be that my 10th grade boyfriend has a tendency to get insanely hung up on girls and is sending a close friend or relative to do these 1 a.m. drop-bys. And this would especially make sense if he is still using drugs like he did in high school. This theory being correct would mean he lied to me when I reached out to him on Facebook a year ago, which of course he would. If this is the case, it seems like he moved on to his current ex. I just hope he doesn't swing back around to me. Comment 2. I decided I am going to try and find out the girl's full name so I can look her up on social media. I may even be able to find her with just the first name that I already know from my stepsis telling me. I can go on to 10th grade boyfriend's Facebook and look in his friend list for a girl with the same first name who looks like she could have been his ex-girlfriend. He may even have pictures with her tagged, so it shouldn't be that hard, unless he wiped his social media clean of her after they broke up. When I am able to find her, I'm going to reach out to her and try and get some answers. I think this is the safest route since I still don't know 10th grade boyfriend's role in this, and I did already ask him once, and he claimed to have no part in it or know anything, which may or may not have been a lie. Based on how scared my stepsis said this girl was, I'm betting she'll be willing to talk to me about it since we share the experience. I will make an update post when I have more info. Thanks everyone. Update. I was able to track down the girl from the party and it led to some pretty wild discoveries. I reached out to her on Facebook, and after a few exchanges, she agreed to meet up for coffee. Let's call her Sarah for privacy. When Sarah and I met up, she was visibly shaken as soon as we started talking about the incidents. She told me she had broken up with my 10th grade ex, let's call him Tony, because he had started exhibiting obsessive and controlling behavior again, much like he did with me back in high school. She showed me the footage from her Ring camera, the same guy, in the same black hoodie, banging on her door at 1 a.m. Seeing it sent chills down my spine. I asked her if she had any idea who the guy might be. She didn't, but she mentioned that Tony had started hanging out with a new group of friends after they broke up. She had met one of them briefly, a guy named Carlos, who fit the description of the man at my parents' house. I decided to do some digging on Carlos. Sarah gave me his last name, and I found him on Facebook. His profile was mostly private, but there were a few public posts and photos. One photo in particular caught my attention. It was a group shot at a party, and there was Tony, right next to Carlos. I knew I had to confront Tony again, but I needed more information first. I reached out to some old high school friends who were still in touch with him. They confirmed that Tony had been acting weird lately, more erratic and paranoid. One friend mentioned that Tony had recently talked about me in a way that made him uncomfortable, like he was still hung up on what happened between us in high school. With this new information, I decided to message Tony again. This time, I was more direct. I told him I knew about Carlos and the strange visits at 1 a.m. He responded quickly, denying everything again, but his responses seemed more defensive this time. Feeling more confident, I decided to go to the police with all the new information, the footage from Sarah's Ring camera, the connections between Tony and Carlos, and the weird behavior Tony had been exhibiting. They took my statement seriously and said they would look into it, but they couldn't promise anything without more concrete evidence. Then, something unexpected happened. 2 nights after I went to the police, I woke up to the sound of banging on my own front door. My heart raced as I looked through the peephole. It was the same guy, Carlos. I grabbed my phone and called 911 while staying silent and hidden. Carlos banged on the door for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes. He then started shouting, saying he just wanted to talk. My dogs were going crazy, barking and growling at the door. When the police sirens finally approached, Carlos ran off into the night. The police arrived and took another statement, but Carlos was gone by then. They assured me they would increase patrols around my neighborhood, but I was left feeling more vulnerable than ever. Why was this guy so determined to find me? And why now, after all these years? I started to feel like I was being watched. Every time I left my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, jumping at every little sound. I even installed additional security cameras around my apartment, and gave a spare key to a friend who lived nearby, just in case. Despite all the precautions, things escalated again. One night, while reviewing the security footage, I saw a shadowy figure lurking around the back of my building. It was Carlos. He didn't try to break in, but he stayed there for almost an hour, just standing and watching. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, so I decided to dig even deeper. I went through old emails and messages, looking for any clue as to why Tony might be so obsessed with me. That's when I found something that made my blood run cold. An old email from Tony, sent shortly after we broke up, in which he threatened to make me pay for breaking his heart. I had forgotten about it, chalking it up to teenage drama at the time, but now it seemed like a sinister foreshadowing of what was happening. I forwarded the email to the police, hoping it would be enough to get a restraining order against Tony. Meanwhile, I reached out to Sarah again, telling her about the latest incidents and sharing the email. She was horrified and agreed to testify if needed. The police started taking things more seriously after seeing the email and hearing Sarah's testimony. They put out a warrant for Carlos, but he was nowhere to be found. Tony was brought in for questioning but denied everything, claiming he had no idea what was going on and hadn't spoken to Carlos in weeks. Things have quieted down for now, but I'm still on edge, waiting for the next shoe to drop. My parents are terrified, and I'm considering moving again, even though I just settled into this new place. It feels like a never-ending nightmare, and I don't know when or if it will ever truly end. For now, all I can do is stay vigilant and hope that the police will find Carlos before he does something even more drastic. I'll update again if there are any new developments, but I can't help but feel like this is far from over. Update 2. I wish I could say things got better, but that's not the case. Since my last update, the situation has taken a turn for the even weirder. A week after the last incident, I was at my apartment, trying to relax with a movie when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from one of my security cameras. I hesitated before opening it, a sinking feeling in my stomach. When I finally did, my worst fears were confirmed. The camera had captured Carlos again, this time during the day. He was standing across the street, just staring at my building. I could see him clearly, no hoodie this time, just a blank expression on his face. I immediately called the police and sent them the footage. They promised to patrol the area more frequently, and urged me to stay with friends or family if possible. I packed a bag and went to stay with my best friend, Lisa, for a few days. While at Lisa's, I decided to go through my social media and old messages again, trying to find any more connections between Tony and Carlos. I found something I had missed before, an old message from a mutual high school friend who mentioned that Tony had gotten into some trouble with a local gang after high school. The gang's name didn't ring any bells, but it made me wonder if Carlos might be connected to that somehow. The next day, I decided to dig deeper into this potential gang connection. I reached out to the mutual friend who had sent the message. Let's call him Mike. Mike was surprised to hear from me but was willing to talk. He told me that after high school, Tony had fallen in with a rough crowd, and Carlos was part of that group. According to Mike, Tony had done some favors for the gang to pay off debts, and Carlos was one of the enforcers. This was starting to make sense in a twisted way. It seemed like Tony might be using his connection to the gang to harass me for breaking his heart all those years ago. I relayed all this new information to the police, hoping it would help them track down Carlos and get to the bottom of this. In the meantime, Lisa and I decided to do some investigating of our own. We started visiting some of the places Mike mentioned Tony used to hang out. Most of the people we talked to were either unhelpful or didn't want to get involved, but one bartender remembered Tony and Carlos. He mentioned that they had been in the bar together just a few nights before my first encounter with Carlos. They were talking intensely, and Tony seemed agitated. Armed with this information, I went back to the police. They took my statement and promised to look into Tony's connection to the gang more thoroughly. However, they still hadn't been able to locate Carlos. A few days later, I got a call from Tony. My heart nearly stopped when I saw his name flash on my screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Why are you doing this, Tony?" I demanded as soon as I picked up. "Doing what?" he replied, sounding genuinely confused. Sending Carlos to my parents' house, to my apartment. What do you want from me? There was a long pause on the other end before Tony finally spoke. I didn't send anyone, I swear. I haven't talked to Carlos in weeks. He's not right in the head. He's been obsessed with you since I showed him your picture. Why would you show him my picture? I asked, exasperated. It was just a stupid conversation, okay? I was drunk. I told him about our past, and he got weirdly interested. I had no idea he would take it this far. I didn't know whether to believe him or not, but Tony's voice had a ring of truth to it. Either way, it didn't change the fact that Carlos was out there, obsessed with me and potentially dangerous. With this new angle, the police seemed to take things even more seriously. They put out an alert for Carlos and started monitoring Tony more closely. They also suggested that I consider getting a restraining order, even though it might be difficult given Carlos' elusive nature. Things were quiet for a few days. I went back to my apartment, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. But then, last night, everything escalated again. I was woken up around 3 a.m. by the sound of shattering glass. My heart pounded as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator about what was happening. I crept out of my bedroom to find the source of the noise. My living room window was smashed, and there was a rock on the floor amidst the broken glass. As I peered through the shattered window, I saw a figure in the distance. It was Carlos. He was standing under a streetlight, looking directly at me. I could see his face clearly now, and the intensity in his eyes sent a chill down my spine. The police arrived quickly, but Carlos was already gone by then. They took my statement again and did a thorough sweep of the area, but there was no sign of him. They stayed for a while, making sure I felt safe, but eventually, they had to leave. Now I'm sitting here typing this out, trying to make sense of it all. I'm scared, exhausted, and completely at a loss for what to do next. The police are doing what they can, but until they find Carlos, I don't feel safe. I've decided to stay with Lisa again, but I know this isn't a permanent solution. Edit. I've taken some of your advice and have started the process of getting a restraining order against both Tony and Carlos. It's a complicated process, but I'm determined to see it through. I've also contacted a private investigator who comes highly recommended. Hopefully, this will bring some new leads. I'll keep you all posted. Update 3. I wish I could say that things got better, but what happened next is something straight out of a nightmare. This will be my last update, and I'm hoping this final post will help bring some closure to everyone following my story, including myself. After my last update, I was on edge but determined to take back control of my life. The private investigator I hired, let's call him Jake, was making some progress. He dug up more about Carlos and his connection to Tony. It turned out that Carlos had a history of violent behavior and had been in and out of trouble with the law. Jake warned me to be extremely cautious. I also started those self-defense classes and made sure I was never alone, always having friends or family around. Despite all these precautions, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. 2 weeks ago, the tension reached a boiling point. I was staying at Lisa's place again. We had a small group of friends over, trying to keep things light and normal despite the dark cloud hanging over us. Around midnight, there was a loud knock on the door. My heart sank. Everyone went silent, and I saw Lisa's face pale as she looked at me. "Stay here," I whispered to the others as I slowly approached the door, my phone ready to dial 911. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. Just more knocking, louder this time. I inched closer to the door and peered through the peephole. There he was, Carlos, standing right on the other side, his face twisted in a way that sent shivers down my spine. I stepped back and dialed 911, my hands shaking. "He's here," I whispered into the phone, giving the operator the address. I hung up and turned to my friends, signaling them to stay quiet. We waited in tense silence, listening to Carlos banging on the door. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, I heard the distant wail of sirens. Carlos must have heard them too because the banging stopped abruptly. I heard footsteps retreating, and then silence. We stayed frozen, listening. I cautiously approached the door again and looked through the peephole. He was gone. The police arrived moments later, and I let them in, explaining what had happened. They searched the area but couldn't find Carlos. They took statements from all of us and promised to keep a close watch on the neighborhood. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump, and I kept replaying the events in my head. The police presence was somewhat comforting, but I knew Carlos was still out there. The next day, Jake called me with news. He had found out that Carlos had been staying in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. He advised me to stay somewhere safe while he gathered more information. I decided to take his advice and went to stay with my parents, even though it felt like bringing danger right to their doorstep. For the next few days, we lived in a state of high alert. The police were making regular rounds, and Jake kept me updated on his investigation. Then, one evening, Jake called with urgent news. He had discovered that Carlos was planning something, but he didn't know what or when. He urged us to be extra cautious. That night, I barely slept. Around 3 a.m., I heard a noise outside, a scraping sound, like someone trying to force a window open. I quietly woke my parents and called the police, whispering into the phone. We stayed hidden, hearts pounding, waiting for help to arrive. Moments later, we heard the sound of footsteps inside the house. My stepdad grabbed a baseball bat, and we huddled together, terrified. The police sirens grew louder, and we heard shouting from outside. The footsteps retreated, and then there was a commotion in the backyard. When the police burst through the front door, they found us shaken but unharmed. They apprehended Carlos in the backyard, trying to escape. He was arrested and taken into custody. The police assured us that he would be facing serious charges and would be off the streets for a long time.